This is Stereoactive Presents. I'm your host, Jeremiah McVay, and in this episode, I'm joined by both Jacqueline Soller and Charles Hinshaw as we continue to look back on movies released in 1999 and discuss how they stand up 20 years on. Seventh in this series is The Blair Witch Project, directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sánchez. I'm here with both Jacqueline Soller and Charles Hinshaw, our two regular contributors on movies once again, and we are continuing our second series of retrospective film segments looking back on movies from 20 years ago in 1999, re-examining them in the context of today to discuss how they've stood up to the test of time. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
So far in this series, we've discussed American Beauty, Fight Club, The Sixth Sense, American Movie, The Matrix, and The Iron Giant. Now, the seventh film we're discussing is The Blair Witch Project. Directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sánchez, the movie presents itself as a documentary pieced together from video, 16mm film, and audio discovered in the woods near Burkittsville, Maryland, 1 year after 3 film students disappeared there while attempting to make a film about a local legend known as the Blair Witch, who supposedly haunts the area. The film as presented follows Heather, Josh, and Mike as they first speak to citizens of the town about the legend, then trek into the woods to find evidence of the witch. Each night, they're confronted with increasingly bizarre occurrences outside their campsite, and each day they become more and more unsure of their path forward until they're both completely lost and at odds with each other. The film premiered at Sundance in January of 1999 before being released commercially on July 14th later that year. In advance of the opening, the filmmakers mounted a marketing campaign that called into question whether the events and circumstances depicted in the movie were actually real or contrived. This campaign, in conjunction with the film's website, were largely credited with the cultural and financial success it earned at the time, resulting in a movie with a budget of only $60,000, ultimately earning more than $248 million at the box office. The critical response was largely positive, though not unanimous, with most of the negative responses seeming to hinge largely on considering the premise of the film some version of gimmicky. In terms of awards, the film garnered what I would personally call a strange or interesting mix of nominations or wins from groups focused on either independent or popular films, which perhaps speaks to its crossover status. And of course, I think it's safe to say the Blair Witch Project is pretty generally considered to have popularized the concept of the found footage film, which has been done in various ways since then. So, Jackie and Chuck, did you see this when it came out, or had you seen it before watching it this time?
I didn't see it when it came out, but I remember my sister went and saw it and was very affected by it, and in some ways that was kind of like having an experience with it without having seen it at the time.
So did you see it before now?
Yes, I have seen it before now.
Okay.
I think maybe twice.
Okay. On video?
Yeah.
I remember when this movie came out and how people said they got really sick after watching it because of all the handheld. But I don't think I've seen it in theaters. I remember watching it with a couple of friends, like probably on VHS, and being like, this is what everyone was so scared about. Like, I remember thinking it was kind of boring.
Okay. So I saw it in theaters when it opened, and I particularly remember that my college roommate was able to see it before me. He saw it in an advanced screening well before it came out, and he was really talking it up, which was sort of mixed for me because I didn't always agree with his taste in movies, so I wasn't really sure what to expect. But then I think between him and the marketing campaign that ramped up around it, I was looking forward to it quite a bit. But it was kind of crazy that at the time, it seemed weird that I heard about it in this weird particular way from my roommate who happened to see a screening of it at college. And then it just like took over the culture for a minute there in the like late spring, early summer. And was just like, even in the midst of like the Phantom Menace coming out, there was still enough room in the culture to just everyone be obsessed with this thing coming out too, which is kind of crazy.
I have a memory suddenly of Cartoon Network ran a 24-hour Scooby-Doo marathon, and all of their bumpers were the Scooby-Doo
I remember that.
people doing a Blair Witch thing.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
It was all about like surrounded about the Blair Witch.
but like for kids, I guess.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Like it's a
yeah,
parody.
right?
Yeah.
It was a parody. But the fact that they would mimic this movie that probably the large portion of their audience had not seen
Mhm.
sort of speaks to its cultural impact, I think, at the time.
Right.
I remember thinking that this movie was real and then being very disappointed when the 3 actors showed up at the MTV Movie Awards. I was like, wait, it's fake?
Right.
This is a lie.
Yeah. Well, I think you had an experience that a lot of people had of it being sort of deflated when they found that out, where I'm pretty sure that I went into it knowing that it wasn't real, but that there was this discussion about whether it was or not. But like it was clear to me from stuff I'd heard, like that it had already been pointed out that it wasn't. So I didn't have that sort of, I don't know what to even call it. Disappointment. I don't know whatever you had.
Mhm.
Yeah. Disillusionment.
Yeah, disillusionment's a good word. So beyond what we've already said, what was your take on it at the time, or the first time you saw it? At least,
I thought it was the real, not real. I guess I thought it was real, but I think by the time I saw it, I knew it wasn't. And yeah, I remember thinking that it was kind of boring. I don't think I paid a lot of very close attention the first time I saw it.
Mhm.
But then by the end, I was like, this is scary and weird, and being very taken by the ending as like, whoa, that was it, but not in a negative way, just in a like, holy shit, what a weird way to end that. That was what I remember the most about seeing it the first time.
Yeah, I think that ending shot really sticks with the viewer because that and the iconic scene that everyone parodies are like the only 2 that I remember
Mhm.
Yeah.
seeing. And for the most part, yeah, I remember people hyping this movie up and talking about how scary it is. And like some of my friends were talking about how it's like a real story that they found these tapes in like buried under some rocks or something like that. And so I watched it and I expected to be really frightened, but most of it was just them walking around in the woods. And I was like, this is what everyone's afraid of.
Right. I think that despite all the hype going into it and all the buildup before it came out, because it was huge. You guys are maybe a little too young to remember it even. But I, as I've talked about multiple times in this series, I was in college and I was at film school. And so there was a lot of excitement from the people around me about this movie. And I was just a little more plugged into culture than I would assume you two were at the time. And it was just inescapable, talk about this movie in certain venues, I think. And despite all that and the expectations game that we talk about so much on this podcast, sometimes I still enjoyed it quite a bit when I finally did see it. And I thought it was pretty clever and entertaining. And I was pretty impressed with how it leaned into its low budget and lo-fi elements and really took a very little and went a long way with it. They get a lot of bang for their buck, both in terms of the actual money
Right.
and just
Right.
the resources and the use of storytelling and craft, I think.
Didn't it win like the award for the least amount of money spent for as much money that they got back or something like that? Because they only spent like
Yeah.
60,000 and they
Yeah.
made like close to 250 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think something has since then replaced it, but for a long time it was the
One of the more profitable movies ever made.
it was
Yeah.
like the
Yeah.
biggest ratio, like budget to gross ratio.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Uh,
I have a question. Since you were in film school, did anybody try to copy the style or like try to make something low budget but with high quality entertainment? I guess
I mean-
as this movie.
I can't remember any specific examples, but I'm sure it happened. It had to have. Thinking back on it, though, like I'm trying to kind of place this movie contextually then. And while like the found footage thing wasn't such a big deal, this isn't the first one to do that, of course, but
Right.
it really did popularize it. The idea of like a fake documentary, or I think what was generally then called a mockumentary
Mhm.
was out there, especially with like Christopher Guest movies.
Right.
And I remember people doing those sorts of things.
Mhm.
I hadn't really thought about this before, but the kind of connection between a movie like this and those sorts of movies, where and none of those are like really depending on some obscuring of reality and artificiality or something. But I think people were kind of primed for a thing like this. I
Right.
guess what I'm saying.
The other thing I was reminded of in reading the trivia for it was the viral
Yeah.
campaign and that the first real use of that stuff and how they kind of fell ass backwards into it a little bit because they filmed all this stuff, all these interviews and sequences involving them finding the footage for the movie and then cut it out of the movie, but used it as marketing material.
Right.
And that, was really effective. And, I guess, internet hadn't been used so frequently in that way to just like, hey, here's a website where you can go and read up on this,
Mhm.
read up in quotations, like it's a real thing, and like do your research on it. And so it was easy to kind of fake it and make it seem true for those reasons also.
Yeah. I wonder if in some small way it affected culture negatively in terms of just like obscuring that line, though. That'd be something I'd be interested in seeing a study about or something.
Mhm.
I don't know. Because there were a lot of people who felt really bummed out when they found out it wasn't real, which to me is kind of weird when you think about it. Because isn't it nice to find out those people aren't dead or missing?
Right.
But
Well, it speaks to that.
bloodlust.
Well, I was telling you about, I was thinking about this a little bit because reading John Waters' book and how he speaks about his fascination with violence and serial killers and stuff like that. And a lot of people have that kind of fascination.
Sure.
And and it's not really much concern with victims or sensitivity. It's more just a kind of morbid fascination and curiosity. And so, then to find out that someone just made it all up is kind of like, well, you kind of fucked with the part that we were interested in,
Right.
which was that it was true.
Well,
Right.
the flip side of that, in a way, is maybe just that people don't like to be duped, and people don't want to feel as if someone has gotten one over on them. And I think that is a valid thing to want,
Right. Right.
and like it's a noble thing to just kind of feel like, hey, I want truthfulness in the world,
Mhm.
and that's something that we could use more of, especially today.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, it's a different landscape.
Yeah,
for sure.
totally. But I do wonder how much of it could be traced back to this movie and things happening at that time.
Mhm.
But I don't know, splintering of culture,
It was the Wild
Fox
West.
News on the rise, and shit like that. But okay, so
Wild West. That came out this year, didn't
it
it?
did. What is your take on it now, and how does it hold up to you 20 years later? And how influential do you think it's been, Jackie?
Watching it now, I am more tolerant of the pacing, and I understand more about the psychological elements of it rather than, wanting to constantly be scared. And I do appreciate how they elevate the creepiness because, it starts off very small and then it escalates to the very end where they get to that house where I assume that guy lived, right? Who kidnapped all those children.
Something Parr, Randall Parr,
Yeah,
Russell
and then there
Parr.
were like all the children's handprints all over the walls and like weird like runes. And then that guy Mike was standing in the corner, and then it harkens back to when they were talking about how that guy made the children stand in the corner while he killed the other one. And then I like also how they call back to things like how Josh was the one who kicked over the stones, and then he was the one who later disappeared. So like maybe there was a connection to that, and they don't really ever explain anything, like who the Blair Witch is. I mean, like they have people talk about what their idea is, but we never know in like concrete history of who she is. And I think that helps add to the mystery and why it's so scary. It's because you don't know much about her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I still think it's a little boring, and like for my taste, it's a little too much of them bickering. But I think the dialogue, which I suppose is improvised, a lot of it is really like sounds real in a
Yeah.
way that people try to make it sound real and ends up sounding fake.
Right.
But that I really appreciated. I also really appreciated the motivation for her to be filming everything, because I think that's another thing that movies will sometimes do is
Right.
they'll create that thing where it's like they have to have them filming because then it's not a movie. But why the hell is she filming? And they really were smart to incorporate that into her personality and her character in this sense that without filming, it's too much for her, the whole experience. And then, I read a lot of the trivia about making it and the way they kind of it's interesting what they came up with in terms of that style of improv and kind of like a Christopher Guest thing almost, where they had the outline and then they let them kind of run loose and they were like away with walkie-talkies sort of managing, but it was really them just kind of like playing it out. That's kind of a neat way for them to go about it. And then I think the ending is still really effective. It's still, I sat in the dark for like the whole credits and was just like, holy shit. It's still very scary.
Yeah.
And the stuff that they don't show. And there's that part where she goes, oh my God, what the fuck is that? And I guess they had a person ready to look like the Blair Witch and the guy forgot to pan the camera over.
Right.
But it's just so much more effective for us not to see it and to be like, what is that? Like, what are you talking about? What's going on? So it's really
It's like one of those Jaws type moments where they're like, the shark doesn't work, so we just won't show it.
Right.
But this was even more accidental.
Yeah, no, they just really used, I think they were very smart to do the pruning that they did, taking out all that expert footage, quote unquote expert footage that they shot and all that stuff and leaving it as mysterious as possible.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The lack of framing makes it work so much better. If this was bookended by someone saying, we went and found this footage and here's the story behind it. Now here's the footage. And then we come back to them at the end or something. And they're like, so that's the footage.
Right.
I just feel like, okay, I don't buy this. But just presenting it as a reality makes it so much more effective and terrifying, I think. But ultimately, I do think it still holds up to me. I've never been a real detractor of the movie. I hear all the backlash over the years, and I think I've only revisited it once between the first time I saw it in theaters and now, and it was about maybe 5 years, I want to say, after it had come out. And I remember sort of nobody liked the movie anymore. This was the sense I got from people around me anyway. And I was just kind of curious, and I watched it, and I was like, I still think this holds up. It's like, it's effective. Like it's like I said before, they lean into all the deficiencies that most people would have and make those strengths of the movie. And I think it works on its own in that way, regardless of the viral marketing campaign and all the cultural hype and all that stuff. But I understand that it's hard to separate that for people. And I think that that's what drags it down for most people who do see it in a negative light. But it was kind of interesting to me how much of the broad strokes of the film I still remembered so vividly, even though it's been so many years since I saw it. And to the point of it still seeming boring or something. I never really found it boring, but there were moments, especially this time watching it, where I was like, oh, am I going to be looking at my watch soon? Is this? And then anytime I felt myself almost getting that little pull, something would happen and I'd be right back in it and super engaged. And I think it is very effective in the pacing that way. It feels like probably in the editing more than anything, they were very intuitive in knowing how far they could go down a kind of meandering path before they had to do something on screen and kind of pull you back in. So why don't we go straight into the question of what, if anything, stands out? Because I think you guys have maybe already started to answer that. I'm going to bring up American Movie. So having now seen American Movie, I think it's interesting that these came out the same year. and are both about people trying to make movies and ultimately without much success, at least at the time that the movie was made. Both had people questioning their authenticity. And whereas Blair Witch has had backlash over the years, American Movie is maybe more of a cult classic, arguably, and probably because it wasn't such a huge financial and cultural smash hit, because there's always room to fall once you've hit that high level. The other thing that stood out to me was what you were talking about, Chuck, the video camera aspect and the motivation for it to be there, and the idea of it, as they say in the movie, I believe, that she's using the video camera as a way to filter reality. And I don't know. I mean, obviously they say it in the movie, so I had to have heard that before, but it really hit me this time. How the presence of the video camera to document everything is really the only way the movie works, like you were saying. And that made me think of how it's oddly similar in that way to something like The Office or any comedy like that came after, where it's like, why is anyone shooting this?
Right.
But right. I do think you're right in that in this movie, it makes sense because it comes from her personality. Whereas in those shows, it's like, okay, someone shot these people for like 10 years and then what did they do with all that footage? So I don't know.
Well, they had I don't remember, and I mean, I don't think I was watching movies like this at the time, but I don't remember there being such a clear sort of character motivation for some of these things. And the idea of Heather's character is so, and from what I read about it, they really had this concept of her, and I guess they considered her like a Captain Ahab type person who would, and you see it in the movie too, where it's like she's, capturing the footage, like getting to the bottom of this Blair Witch mystery is so important to her. And then it kind of bleeds into this thing of dealing with the reality through the camera. So even that, I think, it's like the working on multiple levels where it doesn't start as a filtering of reality. It like becomes that when things get dangerous and strange. So yeah, I think I just was really taken with how much they had thought those relationships through, because I think probably the first time I saw it, and my memory of it was that it was more kind of hodgepodge, like, kind of slapdash, other phrases mean the same thing. But they really thought about it, and it was interesting. I read that Mike was supposed to be the one who was taken away, but Heather and Josh were having actual like arguments that were getting so intense that they like switched
like in real life,
yeah. That they switched it up, and somehow they edited around the fact that Josh was arguing with her way more than Mike and stuff. Like just a lot of really interesting stuff that could have been a cool like American movie style behind the scenes thing, because that's the only thing that it is where it's like we didn't know. It's kind of the inverse of an American movie situation where they made a movie that we all thought was real, but you really were watching the movie.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Right. But like Coven is not as memorable as Blair Witch, but the making of it is. And so it seems like I guess what I'm getting at is that it's very humorous that we didn't know anything about how they made it, because how they made it is actually really interesting and like kind of more interesting than the average movie, even something like Coven.
Jackie, what stood out to you on this watch?
Watching this movie again, there's a lot that I didn't remember. I remember specifically, the ending, the girl talking into the camera with the snot dripping down her nose, and also when Mike was like, "I kicked the map in the creek."
Right. I'd forgotten about that completely.
Like I feel like that's the only quote I can remember from that movie. Right. When he's like, "I kicked the map in the creek." Watching it again, I feel like I can relate to that feeling where you're like stuck with these people for a really long time, and you get really annoyed if you're trying to get somewhere and you're just stuck and you're like, no, let me see the map or let me see the compass. And you're like, I totally relate to that. So I was like, I guess this movie's more about their relationship to each other and them trying to get out of the situation rather than it being a horror movie about a witch trying
Right.
to kill these kids. So that's what I thought of it this time around.
Yeah, I think I had a similar thing because I think more this time than previous times because I was much younger then and I guess have more experience now mathematically. I found myself much more judging the reality of the moment in the film against my own lived reality and being like, is that how people really act? Have I acted like that in situations like this? I'm like, yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. I think people actually get this annoyed with each other. I
feel
think
like-
little stupid things like you start to really pick at, and I found it all very real seeming.
Yeah, especially if you're hungry and tired.
Yes.
I feel like it's really easy to get irritated
Mhm.
by other people.
And that thing where they're all trying to be the leader, kind of. They're
Yeah.
all trying to come on, let's just do this, and then
Yeah.
we'll get over it. We'll get through it. No, come on, Mike, you guys. It's
Yeah.
a lot of that. That was the stuff that I was like, all right, I don't need to see another scene of them
Yeah.
doing this.
Yeah, especially I didn't used to hike, but I've taken up hiking in recent years, and yeah, it can be frustrating when you're on a trip or a hike and you're just like, oh man, this sucks.
Right.
Anything else that stood out to you before we move on?
I never realized how much you look up her nose in that shot. And then that was always the joke. And that was
Yeah.
the spoof in the Scary Movie also.
Right.
The Scary Movie spoofy movie.
What was in the bundle of the
It's his teeth.
It's his teeth.
Yeah.
Was it also his tongue?
No.
What was that piece of meat then?
I think it was just red blood.
See, I was
Wasn't it?
confused on this too because at first I thought it was teeth and I remembered as being teeth, but for some reason this time the scale of the
Mhm.
frame or something, I was like, "There's no way those are teeth. Those are huge."
Maybe it's
I read it in it.
It is teeth.
In what I read, it's teeth and part of his hair.
Okay.
Oh,
And it's all bloody. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's like the mass of red is just all the blood that's spread out over the fabric that's his shirt or whatever.
I'm with you though, Jackie, and that being unclear.
because it's like
yeah, I didn't
there's
know
like
either.
A,
I had to
there's
read
like a
about it to
bright
know what it
red
was.
chunk, and I
Mhm.
don't know what that is. And I was
Mhm.
like, is
Maybe
his
the
tongue?
gums or something. I don't know.
Because then I was like, if it's his tongue, but then you hear him later, it's
Oh.
like it's a fucking like-
Continuity error.
No. It's like the witch being able to mimic voices.
Oh.
Well, you can yell without your tongue. Ah!
But then he's like, over. Wasn't he like over
That did not
here?
prove anything. You have a tongue.
Right, but I'm not using it. At least I don't think.
Wasn't he talking to? He's like over here or something
I
like
don't
that.
remember.
Oh,
now.
maybe. That stuff is really scary,
Yeah,
though.
it's yeah,
all that stuff
pretty
of
much.
him, like hearing voices and all the stuff.
And like the children,
Children.
playing, that was fucked up.
Kids are so scary.
Especially at like, why are you playing at night?
Right, that's what it is. Those kids should be in bed.
Oh, you know what else? On the video camera thing, American Beauty was also this year, and
Right.
that's such a big part of
Oh.
that movie. And it's kind of funny to me. I think we talked about this in the episode where we talked about American Beauty, but the fact that they latch on to that as a big element of the story, and it's this shitty version of what we now have,
Mhm.
where like video has gone so far beyond that. And I don't know, there's just something interesting to me about the
Yeah.
Yeah.
low quality representation of the world around you being something beautiful within the film.
I'll say that after I saw Blair Witch Project, I put on a found footage movie from like a recent one just to see. And it,
This time you did.
yeah, this
Right.
time I did to compare. And I was like, wow, this is like way, like the quality is so high def
yeah.
compared to Blair Witch Project. And yeah, it's just miles different.
Yeah, because any of us could go out and shoot with our phone right now and it would look
Right.
better than this movie.
Yeah.
They
And-
were really primed for it, and I remember seeing this footage. There's behind the scenes footage on Pulp Fiction where a guy's shooting with like a DV camera, or at the time it was just like a video camera, and Bruce Willis is like, someone's gonna take one of those and go and make their movie for like and he even says like $60,000 or something, and make $1 million fucking dollars or something like he calls it. And it was, I think it was just something that people were conscious of, that anybody could film anything.
Right.
And that was new. That even in the days of, larger, bulkier videotape cameras
Yeah.
or Super 8 or anything like that, it was never so easy.
And
Right.
I remember in film school, one of my professors was like adamant. He's like, this cell phone, one day people are going to make movies with this cell phone. It's the future, you guys. And now look at like, what's that Sean Baker movie? Tangerine.
Yeah.
Unsane.
Unsane. Yeah. There you go.
The genius. But yeah, I think they were just ready. I mean,
Yeah.
it seemed it was on the tip of everyone's tongue. We just gave it a name.
Is this sort of the first movie to really be successful using essentially home video as the format? I mean, it's not just that, because of course
Right.
they switch between that and 16 millimeter, but I mean, it's supposed to look amateurish,
Right.
you know?
And it does. I was taken with that this time too. The number of shots that are just grainy black,
Right.
and you just listen to whatever you're.
Yeah.
That was kind of new. Yeah, as far as I know.
Yeah, I feel like this was the first, at least, to break into the mainstream.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there are a bunch of people who made movies with their DV cameras, but
Yeah, I mean, I was doing that in high school. Not even DV, like compact VHS. You know,
yeah,
I was
or super
in the
no,
90s.
was
That's
it
what
eight-
you did, and then you tried to go to film school, and they're like, you need to shoot on film, and you're like, why? There's digital videos coming up. Like, why do we
high
need
eight,
to do
high
this?
eight, that's it. That's what I was looking at. High
Yeah.
eight.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like this is the one that was actually in theaters and things
Right,
like that.
Right. The funny thing
Yep.
too is that I like looked back and I was like, this concept isn't new. And it's funny that people were so taken in by it, because both Texas Chainsaw and Cannibal Holocaust, maybe lesser known.
Right. Well, I think that
is
gets to the
like-
point there.
Yeah, is the exact, but it's like the exact same thing. It's like people went into the jungle and never came back.
Right.
And then
Well, I never heard about Cannibal Holocaust before this movie,
Mm.
and then I started hearing people talk about that,
Right.
and prompted by this movie.
Right.
But sorry, there's one of the Texas Chainsaw
The
Massacres.
first one,
The first one?
they promoted it like it was a true story.
Oh,
Not
did
so
they?
much that it was found footage, but that it
Okay,
was,
gotcha.
but that it was like these kids went and disappeared, and this is what happened. And that concept of like kids going and disappearing is very
Right.
horror, friendly.
Sure. But if I'm understanding what everybody's saying to this point, we all still think this is a good movie, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and we know it's not real. How much do you think your enjoyment of the movie, after knowing it's not real, is because you yourself work in film and television and video, and you can sort of relate to the problems of making a movie and the craft of making a movie and take those elements into account, as opposed to like if you were just an average moviegoer who had no experience with these sorts of things, do you think you'd feel more duped and less into it?
I would maybe amend my answer and say that I think that 50% of it is enjoyable.
Oh.
And I do think that but it doesn't make me say that it's a bad movie. I just don't have I can't watch the first half a lot.
Mhm.
It's slow, and it does affect it that it's not true. It's just like, all right, we get it. And I can't handle them arguing and bickering. But the scary stuff is so good and so well done that it puts it into that category of being a good movie for me.
Okay. And Jackie, how about you with the having a background in production? How much does that affect your ability to enjoy the movie despite it not being real?
I find myself watching movies and being a little bit more forgiving because I know how hard it can be to make a film and how much work goes into it. So I try to find good things about movies when I watch them and not, inherently want to be like, this sucks. That said, with this movie, I feel like even if I didn't know much about film production, that I would still enjoy this movie. I feel like there are a lot of things that people can relate to, and there are a lot of things that are like legitimately terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
I think but like Chuck said, the fact that some of it can be repetitive, that might make people feel bored. And I think if they thought it was real, that people be more accepting of that because it you're like, well, this is how it is in real life. Like people are just are like this constantly, so it makes sense that it's always in there. But then if you're looking at it from a filmmaking perspective, like they could have like edited more around it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. So have the people involved in the film been successful since then? And we'll talk about the 2 directors and the 3 main cast.
I know that just the main cast, they've only done like mostly TV, like really like unknown films.
Well, yeah. I mean, looking at their resumes, at least on IMDb and stuff like that, it seems like this may have been at least a highlight, if not the highlight of most of those 5 people's careers. That's not to say that they've had bad careers at all.
Right.
It seems like those 3 actors are pretty much working actors or have been over the years. And it seems like Eduardo Sánchez has done a lot of work, especially in TV. Myrick, I think, has done less, but I don't know. Maybe that's his choice. Maybe he's cool with that.
I read that Heather Donahue had some trouble getting work because she was so associated with this movie.
Really?
People had a hard time separating her from it. And then she retired and grows marijuana now.
Good for her.
Oh, cool. Where at?
Probably California or some place where it's legal.
Right.
But yeah, she retired from acting.
Well, that's good.
Did she? I thought
that's what I read.
And maybe she.
I read it on Wikipedia, so it
I
could
saw
be a
that she
lie.
was on an episode of Always Sunny, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. In 2005, though. So the last thing that she did that came out, at least according to IMDb, was something called The Morgue, which went to video in 2008.
Oh, well.
There you go.
The last high-profile thing on here is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, it looked like she did some episodic TV work here and there. And yeah.
Well,
so it sounds like you're right, Chuck.
That's just what I read on Wikipedia, was that she had retired and now grows pot.
Yeah. So do you think the movie will continue to stand the test of time? Or if you don't think it has until now, do you think it might find an audience again in the future?
I feel like this movie will always be talked about, or at least someone would be like, oh yeah, like I hear people reference this movie all the time, but I don't know what it is. Let me go watch that. Mm-hmm. But that said, I feel like other movies since then have gained more notoriety. Like I feel like people credit the found footage thing to Paranormal Activity more than Blair Witch Project. I know that people talk about that more and how it influenced other horror movies since then. So I thought that was like, I was like, what about Blair Witch Project? How can you forget that?
That's so weird to me too, because I don't think of Paranormal Activity as a found footage movie, because it's like security cameras.
What's the word? Just like
I mean, it is. I saw it listed as like an example of the found footage phenomenon, but to me, it's like this footage wasn't lost. They fucking recorded it and then looked at it again. Like this is the whole concept of this is that it's something we didn't know about, and then suddenly it's like, hey, what's this? Holy shit! So that was always weird to me that those two are so interconnected.
Right.
But
and then when did Cloverfield come out? Did it come out after Paranormal Activity?
Well, I don't know about after Paranormal, but I also saw that it listed as like owing its part of its legacy to Blair Witch or whatever.
I'm looking that up. So Paranormal Activity was 2007. Cloverfield was 2008. The Last Exorcism, 2010.
I never saw that.
I didn't see that. Troll Hunter. That's a found footage movie.
Oh wait, wasn't that like a mockumentary, like a funny thing
Probably.
about someone?
I mean, it's called Troll Hunter.
Yeah,
sounds fun.
Chronicle, 2012. I never saw that.
Oh yeah, that was
pretty good, isn't
it?
Yeah, but Max Landis is in shit.
Oh, that's a Max Landis movie?
Yeah, he wrote it.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, some people already think it doesn't stand the test of time. I think that's unfortunate, but it's the way it is, I guess. I don't know how much I'm overestimating that, how much that is like people that I know just are like, because I brought up, out in the world, I'll talk to my friends about like we're doing this series of on different movies, and it's interesting to get their take or reaction to like the movies that we're covering. Everybody understands that you're covering American Beauty, even if they like it or don't like it. All of the movies get at least some positive reaction. I don't think there's been one person who was like that excited about the Blair Witch Project. And I was kind of surprised and disappointed by that, because I think that they're underestimating the power of the film even 20 years later. And I do worry that it will be forgotten about over time. And I think that's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, it inspired so much, if not copycats or but also like parodies and
I haven't
things like
watched
that.
most of those, honestly, so I don't know how much of it for me is that I don't have that dilution of it through seeing the thing copied over and over and having to compare it to those, if that makes sense. And
is that what Paranormal Activity is like, what you're referring to when you talk about like being copied, or there's another one that's more on the nose?
I meant more like the style, copying the style.
Okay.
yeah.
Just like super low,
Like
lo-fi,
handheld,
right.
like
Mhm.
we're
Mhm.
running around.
Right.
I think for the yeah. I mean, to me, like I said, I haven't watched a lot of those. The one that I've seen that maybe comes the closest in terms of that is Cloverfield,
Right.
because that one is definitely like. But that one,
That
I
one's
don't
more
think
high
I don't
budget.
think they sell it as well, because I don't understand watching that movie
Why they're still
why
filming.
TJ Miller is just fucking pointing a camera at everything.
Right.
Like
Right.
it makes much more sense in this movie, like Chuck was
Right.
describing earlier. I think to me, like what makes this movie hard for people to still be on board with is they can't separate it from that viral marketing campaign and that influence it's had over the years.
Mhm.
And they just see it as sort of like this weird novelty from 1999 that they don't
Mhm.
want to go back to.
It seems like it's ripe for a resurgence because of that.
Yeah.
Like it's ripe for people to go back and be like, hey, this isn't as bad as I remember it being. I also realize I'm watching a little bit more horror stuff now and getting, kind of shading in that blind spot. I don't know if that's the term, but you get what I'm saying. And realizing kind of the differences in what I like. And this is really my kind of thing. Like I like witches and spooky shit. And I think it depends on what kind of horror movie you're into. Because if
Sure.
you're more about gore or something like that, then yeah, this isn't going to be your thing. And so it really depends on what your genre, what your subgenre of horror is, if
Sure.
you're going to be down or not.
I wonder how much they also maybe shot, and by they, I'm not even sure who I'm referring to, but I wonder how much they shot themselves in the foot by making a sequel to this movie and
Right.
then some sort of a remake a few years back.
How involved were the original peeps
Let me
in
look and
the
see if I can figure that out.
in the second one?
I know the director worked on the 1999, not 90, was it 2000? I forget.
2000.
Book
Yeah.
of Shadows, Blair Witch 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which weirdly is directed by Joe Berlinger, well known for making actual documentaries. And this is
Really?
not a documentary or a fake
Oh.
documentary.
Right.
Like that was the sequel was not the same concept, right? It was like an actual fiction film, not a fiction
Right.
film pretending to be a real documentary,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it was.
I never
I never
saw
saw it either. I have no interest
But
in
it's
seeing
about
I
it.
the kid.
remember
It's like these
watching
kids
it.
going, and you saw it.
Yeah, I remember watching it, but like a long time ago, so I don't really remember much. I just remember being like, "Oh, this is much more exciting than the first one because there's like more stuff happens."
I just remember the trailer, and they had this like goth woman being like, "You want to know about the Blair Witch?" or
Right.
something like that, and I was like, "This is hokey."
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, about Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2, stylistically different from the first film, the plot revolves around a group of people fascinated by the mythology surrounding the Blair Witch Project film. They go into the Black Hills where the original film was shot and experience supernatural phenomena and psychological unraveling. So, I mean, it sounds
I
like
can
it
relate.
could have been interesting, like this
Yeah.
meta sort of thing about this meta movie. I don't know. Probably
think it
laying
was-
it on a little too thick.
Yeah, and I think it was all
that's-
just a money like cash in.
Sure.
kind
Yeah.
of
And it
thing.
was probably also a little too close. Like it came out the next year.
Well,
I
yeah,
think
you know,
I think we were already in like
Bangkok.
backlash mode at that
Right.
point. People were like,
It's
"Oh,
hard
that,
to
that wasn't
gauge
real.
these
Fuck
things."
you. I'm not gonna go see this."
I
Right.
think they also gave more of a backstory on the Blair Witch Project in that movie. I think
Right,
that's
right,
where they
yeah.
revealed, like, oh, this is where we found the tapes.
Right,
you know,
right.
something like that.
I don't need to
I didn't
know
see
all
it.
that. And then I couldn't
I'd be
even tell
curious
you
to
what
watch it now. Actually,
what the Blair Witch is.
Yeah, what
Yeah,
was that?
I
all
wanna know
about?
what
Let's see
that
what
is.
that one is.
That came and went.
It's all about Blair from The Facts of Life.
Okay, so again from Wikipedia, here is the description of the 2016 Blair Witch movie, just called Blair Witch. The film, shot in a found footage style, follows a group of college students and their local guides who venture into the Black Hills Forest in Maryland to uncover the mystery surrounding the prior disappearance of Heather Donahue, the sister of one of the characters. So it's a
shit.
sister.
That's a
yeah.
classic trope of the horror
Horror,
films. The sister,
And also
bent-
Die Hard.
I like
yes, bent on vengeance.
I would have watched this movie if it was Jeremy Irons. But
Right.
It's not.
Maybe it is.
I assume it's
I
not.
liked Adam Wingard's movie The Guest. So I'm wondering if it's
Oh, it's him.
yeah. I was like, oh, Adam Wingard.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's just a name, man.
Okay. Back on track. So, what are your favorite scenes or elements? And I know we've kind of already talked about quite a few things here. So, give me your two or
I'll-
three top ones.
I'll add because I feel like I've said the others.
Yes, which I will hit on the head again. But go ahead.
Yeah, I like the iconic. What are they? What would you call them? Wood dolls, like those
yeah.
those people
Stick
that they made out of
figures.
stick
people.
figures. Yeah, I thought that part was especially creepy. Just like someone made all these and hung them from the trees to like freak them out, and you know all the weird shit like them walking for 16 hours and then coming upon the same spot that they started at. That's kind of crazy. So that means it's like somebody's fucking with the compass, like the
Mhm.
magnetic
Mm.
fields. So it's like
I didn't even pick up on it. I just thought they were
supernatural.
really inept. I didn't think that they were being. I should rewatch it with that.
that there's like because like you know with supernatural things they say that it can also affect the environment
Right,
and that so using that was also creepy and just like going harkening back to that guy who fucking killed all those kids.
Rustin Parr.
Rustin
That's his
Parr.
name.
Yeah, that was creepy too. So
You really like that name, don't you?
I like that they invented this dude because you can find that website is still up. So you
Really?
can
Is
go
it?
and look and like they still have his like bio and this weird creepy picture
so
of
who
him.
is he?
I mean, they just made him up. As
Yeah, but like what was his role in society? Just like
He
this
was like
crazy
a- yeah,
guy.
he
He's like
killed-
president of the United States.
He was just a normal dude, and the Blair Witch told him to kill these kids, and so he did, as anyone would, if the Blair Witch told them to. And but he's creepy and weird. And I like the idea too with that house that they don't show, talking about the lack of framing device.
Mhm.
It's kind of cool to think that house just like appears.
Right.
You know, that it's not a place that, you know, sheriff's deputies can go and be like, we found some film, you know, but that it's this weird thing that only shows up when they're ready to get you.
Yeah.
Wait, is that a thing?
Well, that's what I assume.
Oh, okay.
Because I mean,
a
it's
magical
not as
house.
much fun when it's just like the daytime and it's some broken down house.
right.
Right.
But it's when it's this thing that you can only kind of stumble upon if they want you to.
Yeah.
And then you go in there and they throw, you know, voices around and
That's so
freak you out and then
creepy.
kill you.
I hadn't thought of it.
and
like
then like you hear Heather on Mike's camera just like shrieking
Yes.
throughout the entire
That was really
house.
effective too, where they
Yeah.
used the audio from the video camera to sync with the 16 millimeter.
that. Right.
That
And-
was another cool way.
that was one of the things that both when I saw it the first time and when I saw it now, I was just so enamored of that kind of creative use of space that they
Mhm.
have there. Because remind me what it is. It's that
Mike is carrying the 16.
right. We're
millimeter.
seeing the 16 millimeter footage and we're hearing the audio from the video camera, right?
Yeah.
But the video cameras hit the ground at this
They're
point.
cutting back and forth between both of them when they're running around the house.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. Heather has the 16
Heather has
millimeter.
16,
I'm
yeah.
wrong. Yeah. But
Right,
they're
right,
cutting
they've
back and
switched.
forth.
Yeah, and so we're in her POV running with the 16 millimeter,
Right,
but we have already seen mic with the video camera
Mhm.
kind of hit the ground, and we're hearing the audio from that, right?
Right.
And and you hear Heather get closer, seemingly in the audio, as we are in her POV, and it's so disorienting and
Yeah.
weird. And that was one of those things that, because I was like a first year film student, I was like, I get that. When I saw it, I was like, I bet most of the people didn't realize that.
Right.
I felt so
It's
snotty.
scary now. I'm kind of scared now. I'm not even kidding. Like talking about going through that house.
It's creepy.
And seeing the handprints and everything, and they're just freaking out.
Mhm.
Oh, Josh, where are you? Like, all that is so terrifying, and nothing is happening.
Yeah.
It's really effective.
It is. Yeah, and then when you see him standing
Right.
facing the wall after apparently getting knocked out or something,
Right.
it's so fucking creepy.
Yeah. It's really scary.
It's so scary.
And then
But
they knock her over.
I will concur. I think that the famous scene of the half close up of her face, up her
Mhm.
nose, I think is still super effective, and there's a reason that it's maybe the most iconic shot
Yeah.
in the movie, and one of the more iconic shots of the last couple decades,
Yeah.
really. One other thing I wanted to shout out is in the stuff at the beginning where they're talking to the people in town, the woman on the street with the toddler,
Yeah.
that was the most real seeming of all those interviews to me. I was just like so enamored of that. I was
Right.
like, how did they get this to seem so real? Because those are all actors.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess just having that kid in there
Right.
fucking with her as she's trying to talk makes it
Right.
seem much more immediate and real or something.
And she's
But
like,
Yeah.
stop talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and she seems so scared.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I really like that moment.
Yeah. They got some great locals
Yeah.
to be the locals.
Any final thoughts?
No, I think it's worth a rewatch if you're into it.
Okay.
That's my final thought.
I feel like this movie is iconic and influential to cinematic history. That's weird that your friends didn't think, like, why would you talk about Blair Witch
That's
Project?
super anecdotal. So I mean, I don't know how much to glean from that, but
But yeah, I hope that people will watch this movie just to see how it influenced other found footage films today, because I know they're still making them, because they're so cheap to do, and I don't think they'll ever stop. I feel like it'll just continue on being its own
I mean, why
genre.
should they? It's the same thing as like reality TV. It's cheap, and if you do it right and hit, it's such a big payoff.
Yeah,
It's
and
crazy.
it's so much easier now than before with with cell phones and just digital media in general.
Yeah.
So I feel like it'll just keep going.
Right. And I think to me, even if the movie sort of is forgotten about over time, which again, I'm basing that on super anecdotal evidence. I don't know if that's actually the case, but you can't help but be influenced by the people around you and their opinions and whatever. But to me, I think this might become a movie I just want to go back to every so often, because it's inspiring to me in a way that you can just look at it and be like, they did so much with so very little. And it can, if you're ever like in a rut creatively or something,
Right.
and you just want to sort of be like, look at what they did. I think it could be something good to shake you out of it if you're ever in need of that. You know what I mean?
For sure.
All right. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stereoactive Presents, and thank you to our guest, Jacqueline Soller. The music in this podcast is composed by Hansdale Sue. My name is Jeremiah Lee McVay. If you like what you hear in this show, please rate and review it in Good Pods, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else that allows that. Doing so helps us to expand our audience, and it is much appreciated. And please follow us wherever you happen to listen to podcasts. Every little bit helps, and again, it is truly appreciated. You can also get in touch with us at stereoactivemedia@gmail.com. And you can find more information about this show and everything else the Stereoactive Media is involved with at stereoactivemedia.com. This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.